Hello everyone, I'm Slate Knightley, and today we're going to ask the question, what if solo leveling was actually good? Now, don't get me wrong, solo leveling isn't a complete disaster. It's popular for a reason. It's flashy, it's easy to binge, and if you just want to see a guy get super overpowered with absolutely zero friction, totally delivers on that. But when you dig into it even just the tiniest bit, you realize it's a series with absolutely massive wasted potential. In this video, I'm going to break down why solo leveling fails to live up to its own ideas. We'll talk about the setting that just goes nowhere, the side characters who would have been a better main character, how Sung Jinwoo went from like a relatable underdog to just a totally cardboard cutout character, and why solo leveling as a concept just doesn't really work. And then also finally how the necromancer angle, it somehow manages to be just as hollow as the rest of it. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to start by talking about the setting. The setting is one of the most unique things about solo leveling, or at least it would be on paper. Unlike most fantasy stories, it's not throwing you into a medieval, typical medieval fantasy world or an isekai type world, the protagonist from a totally different dimension. Solo leveling happens in our world. It's modern day South Korea. You've got cars, skyscrapers, smartphones, and then suddenly magical portals, appear full of monsters. That setting should give you so many possibilities, different things you can explore. Like we could explore how society adapts to the presence of dungeons. How does the government regulate them? Do laws get passed about entering gates? How does the media cover the disasters? What happens to the global economy with the crystals pulled safe from the dungeons, and when that becomes like a new source of energy? The author sprinkles in some of these ideas, like just enough to give us a little tease. Like crystals are casually mentioned as being used for powerful generation, or at least they want to develop them as a way to have an infinite power source. And they talk about how they could literally reshape the whole entire way the world is run. That's an amazing sci-fi hook right there, built in. Imagine countries competing to control energy-rich dungeons, corporations lobbying to get pieces of the action. That's just world building. That's narrative fuel. But solo leveling never picks it up. It never does anything with it. It's the equivalent of showing us the coolest tool in the box and then just putting it on the shelf and never doing anything with it. Then you've got the guilds versus the government. So on the surface, that's a really cool, like a fascinating dynamic. You could have the government wants to control, because the dungeons are dangerous. And you got, concerns about national security impacts, and then you also have guilds who want to take control because the dungeons mean more money, power, and prestige. And that conflict could give you a whole lot of potential political intrigue, backroom deals, betrayals, even wars just fought either in the open or in the shadows between the two different forces. Kind of a world like cyberpunk, with massive megacorps vying for control, and the government possibly be either being weak or, in this case, maybe the governments are strong and fighting back as well. Instead, all it gets is just lip service. We're told the guilds are powerful, but they don't certainly seem to do anything about it. We're told the governments don't like it, and then so what? Like nothing meaningful ever comes from it. So here's the problem with not correctly using the setting. The reason why the setting matters is it's supposed to be used to create stakes. Without it, it just doesn't matter. Like, would it really make any difference if, instead of it being a modern setting with, it's set in the middle of the city, would it matter if it was in a fantasy land? Is the gate far away in the middle of nowhere? It just doesn't really matter. By choosing the modern day setting, like the author had a chance to make it matter, to show how ordinary people, power grind. It's about keeping the lights on in the city or preventing a rival country from monopolizing energy resources. You could give it a narrative weight that is more than just, hey, look cool, Jinwoo gets stronger. Like, wow, isn't that amazing? Instead, solo leveling just plays it too safe. The setting is just a backdrop, nothing more. The world could have been alive, messy, full of tension and change, but in practice, it just feels static. It's like booting up a massive fantasy RPG open world. You see the map and you're excited, and then every single time you visit a quest marker, it just teleports you into just a generic same old dungeon over and over again. Where this cool, amazing world exists in theory, but it just doesn't exist in practice. Like, why even bother making it a modern world setting if you're just not going to use that in any way? Okay, so that's enough about the setting. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the side characters, because solo leveling is full of potentially interesting side characters, and honestly, all of them are way more interesting than Jinwoo. And I guess a quick note here to start with. Forgive me for mispronouncing the names. So I'm going to start with Lee Jinhoo. So on paper, she's an amazing concept. A B-ranked healer who isn't fearless or unstoppable, but is instead traumatized. And she's afraid. She's shaken by her past experiences in the dungeons. She just can't shrug it off the way others do. All the death and the violence. So I mean, that's not only relatable. Like that's an interesting, cool, unique perspective in a power fantasy. So I can imagine watching her character arc, like somebody starting out barely able to step into a dungeon, like even a low-level dungeon, slowly building up her courage, facing the big scary threats that broke her will originally. Like that's the stuff of real character growth. Like that's the core traditional hero arc. Overcoming your flaws and your weakness and coming out way stronger on the other side. Instead, this story just kind of drops her. Like she just becomes background noise. Her trauma never gets explored, or any potential from her just vanishes. And then we've got Song Chi-yul. This guy is absolutely gold mine of character development. Like he's spent his years of his life just mastering the sword, only to be told, "Oops, actually your class is magic." It's like investing your whole career in one skill set, and then suddenly the system tells you it doesn't matter anymore. Like what do you even do from there? Like, do you cling to your swordsmanship in defiance? Do you try to hybridize, becoming sort of a jack of all trades with an unpredictable style? Do you reluctantly abandon the blade, embrace magic fully, even if it feels like a betrayal of your all the work you've done your whole life? Like any of those kind of paths would be compelling, but like the tension between the fate and choice is right there. Like it's the stuff of Greek tragedy, like having to struggle against fate and resist. Like can they succeed, or will you be crushed by the inevitable fate bearing down upon you? But instead, the story just doesn't care. He's shuffled out of the spotlight just almost as soon as he appears. And this is where I love drawing comparisons to RPGs. Like, imagine you're halfway through the game as a swordsman, you've poured hours in your skill tree, you're proud of your playstyle, and all of a sudden the devs force you into the mage class without any way to respec. Like, some players would just completely rage quit, others would try to make it work. That whole struggle, the adaptation, it could have been a brilliant character study, but instead, just solo leveling just doesn't even try it. It doesn't do anything at all with that potential hook. Next up, we have Yu Jinho, the goofy, spoiled rich kid trying to prove himself. He starts off trying to build his guild, but he's weighed down by the expectations of family and money and the constant shadow of being underestimated. Like that's a ready-made arc about impotence, ambition, and friendship. Like imagine Jinwoo and Jinho as equals, trying to build a guild together, clashing over the decisions, trying to learn from each other. Like that would actually give us like conflict, comedy, and emotional weight, like all in one. Instead, Jinwoo's basically just comic relief. His quirks are exaggerated for laughs. Any of the deeper potential, the family struggles, and any of his ambition, it's all just brushed aside. And then there's Che Ha-yin. On paper, she should be one of the more interesting, like unique high rank hunters in the series. She has her heightened sense of smell that makes working with others difficult. She literally feels like the other hunters stink from the magic smell on them. Like that's an interesting limitation. It sets her apart from the user, or the usual super strong, you know, flawless girl boss type of trope. But like the series could have leaned into that. They showed her, her weakness, her journey of learning to manage the sensory overload, maybe over transforming her weakness into a strength. Detecting enemies before others, reading the magical environment special ways that the others can't. Or at the very least, they could have set up this stereotypical loner overcoming her issues and learning the power of teamwork and friendship. But instead, she just literally gets flattened into the love interest who swings a sword. And the thing is, it's not just these four. Like solo leveling introduces character after character who could have brought depth, perspective, variety to the story, and it just tosses them aside. Everyone exists only to orbit Jinwoo's power trip. And this is why almost every single side character seems like they would make a more compelling protagonist than Jinwoo. Not because they're stronger, but because they're human. They're actually more interesting. They have flaws, conflicts, character arcs that they could be following. They're not perfect power fantasies. They're relatable. And that's what makes the story resonate with people. The tragedy is that any of these characters could have been compelling protagonists, or at the very least, the dynamic party members, where the characters bounce off each other, challenge each other, grow together. Solo leveling instead just sidelines them all so Jinwoo can solo grind, uninterrupted, and in the progress, the story just loses its chance to be about anything more than stats and levels. Here's the thing. Sung Jinwoo actually starts out as a good character. That's part of why his decline is so frustrating. Like in the beginning, he's the definition of relatable. He's weak, he's broke, he's taking risks to support his family, but he's also friendly. He like the other people around him, they enjoy being near him, they joke with him, they laugh with him. He's not the strongest guy in the room, but everybody likes being around him. You look at early Jinwoo and think, yeah, I know somebody like that. Like I want that guy to succeed. He seems like the underdog that you root for, like not just because he struggles, but because he seems like a good person. But then the system chooses him, and he gets his second chance, his secret special power, his unique ability to grow infinitely stronger. And instead of evolving naturally from the person he was, it's like he sheds his skin and just comes out as something totally entirely different. Suddenly he's stoic, cold, and edgy. You know, his sense of humor vanishes. Any warmth, any humanity he has disappears. The friendly guy, hanging out with the teammates, is totally replaced with somebody who just mutters one-liners at enemies before killing them. And this isn't just a case of, power changes people, because honestly, that would be more interesting. Watching a kind-hearted underdog slowly drift into arrogance and detachment, exploring the corruption of power. But solo leveling doesn't even do that. There's just no gradual slide. It's no internal conflict at all. It's just a switch flipping. Episode 1, Jinwoo's a person. Episode 5, he's more of a statue than the statues that killed him in the beginning. And that loss matters because the character is the anchor of the story. When you have an underdog, the tension comes from watching them struggle, improvise, try to be the scrappy hero scraping their way to victory. When you just have a blank slate powerhouse, like all tension evaporates. If Jin Woo walks into a dungeon, you already know how it ends. He wins. The only mystery is how flashy the animation is going to be. And that's what makes his decline worse than if he'd just been a totally flat character from the beginning. A flat protagonist can at least be carried by the world or by the accompanying side characters and companions. But Jinwoo starts interesting and then just totally discards everything that works about him. It's like the author accidentally wrote a great character at first, realized it wasn't cool enough, and then just replaced him with a generic power fantasy lead. It's like somebody watched Shadow and Eminence and didn't realize it's a spoof, and they just decided to play Sid completely straight. Think about how different things could have been. Like, imagine Jinwoo kept his personality as he grew stronger. Imagine he was still the warm, friendly, joking with allies, even as he became absurdly powerful. That contrast, somebody being insanely strong but still being approachable and human, that would have made him a more memorable character. It's rare to see somebody who retains their humanity at the top. Or you could just have the opposite. Have this power slowly corrupt him, and instead, Junwoo is just another brooding loner with nothing at all to say. And that's the other tragedy. He loses his connections to the people around him. Like early Jinwoo was part of a community. He fought with parties, he relied on others, he had to navigate being the weakest in the group, come up with strategies, overcome obstacles, things that forced him to interact, to show his personality. But as soon as he goes solo, all of those interactions just disappear. And because the story doesn't bother developing his personality in isolation, we're just left with silence. Solo leveling's greatest weakness is baked into its name. By making him solo, it cuts off from the very dynamics that could have fleshed him out as a character. In the better version of the story, Jinwoo's growth wouldn't erase his humanity, it would challenge it. The more powerful he becomes, the more pressure he'd feel to stay grounded, the more he risks drifting away from ordinary people that he once fought alongside. That kind of internal tug of war could have made his arc compelling, but solo leveling just skips all the nuance in favor of a protagonist who looks cool in promo art, but says and feels almost nothing. Jinwoo doesn't level up, he levels down as a character. It's like the system didn't just buff his stats, it deleted his personality as well. And this ties into the fundamental problem with solo leveling. The whole idea of solo leveling is kind of broken. At first, it's thrilling, watching Jinwoo carve his way through dungeons alone, facing impossible odds, and somehow always coming out on top. But once the dust settles, you realize what's missing. If your protagonist is constantly soloing everything, then by definition, they're cutting off the teamwork, the companionship, conflict, any character development, all the things that make story engaging. Think about it. Most great anime thrive on the push and pull between characters. These relationships, they create tension, growth, and stakes that go far beyond whether the hero wins a fight. But in solo leveling, Jinwoo never has any of that. Other hunters are there as spectators, not as partners. Even Cha, who sets up as a potential equal, never gets any narrative weight to balance Jinwoo out. And the series itself basically admits this. By episode 12, Jinwoo literally says, I won't be solo leveling anymore. Like, that's a confession baked into the title. Even the authors seem to realize that the formula just isn't working for a long-term structure. Normally, you get a title drop and it's like, ooh, wow, cool. They said, it's the moment. They said the big thing. However, in this case, the title drop is basically saying the concept is terrible. Let's just stop. Let's not do that anymore. Okay, so they realize the flaw. Well, I mean, that's a good thing. They're going to involve more interesting characters and bring them in, right? Nope. Instead of pivoting to, a rich ensemble cast with real relationships, what do we get? Skeletons. And I mean, yeah, sure, the shadows look cool, watching an army of monsters rise up at Jinwoo's command and undeniably a hype moment, but what do they actually add? They're not characters. They don't challenge Jinwoo. They don't push back. They don't grow. They're just props. A swarm of CGI minions can't replace the drama and unpredictability of human companions. Imagine how much more impactful a series would be if Jinwoo had to genuinely rely on guildmates or navigate clashing personalities on a dangerous raid. Like that would give us, more banter and conflict and the kind of emotional stakes that stick with you. Instead, solo leveling just doubles down on the gimmick. Jinwoo's summons become his only real team, and that's where the story just flatlines. Without meaningful bonds to shape them, without allies who can stand beside him as equals, Jinwoo stops feeling like a protagonist and starts feeling like a video game avatar. Powering up, clearing the next dungeon, summoning the next boss to fight under his command. It's all just spectacle without any substance. It just leaves the anime hollow once the novelty wears off. In short, the biggest irony of solo leveling is that the title describes not just Jinwoo's playstyle, but the show's biggest weakness. A story that insists on going it alone can only carry you so far before eventually the emptiness catches up with you. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like summoner and taming style characters in games and in anime. There's something inherently fun about commanding an army of creatures, especially when each summon has its own quirks and personality and bonds with the protagonist. Done right, it creates an entire secondary cast of characters who can support or challenge or even emotionally break the hero in ways that other humans can't. Series like That Time I Got Reincarnated by a Slime manages to make their summons distinct, give them voices, personalities, relationships that actually matter. But in something like solo leveling, it's just to see a face of skeletons and monsters, and they expect us to feel something. The problem isn't just that they're generic, it's that they're completely interchangeable. Oh, Skeleton 487 dies in battle? Don't worry, Skeleton 288 will take his place. There's just no personality, no spark, no connection. They're just disposable units on a battlefield. As emotionally engaging as watching somebody grind the same mobs 500 times in a video game. And that's where the anime misses one of its biggest opportunities. Imagine if Jinwoo's shadows had distinct personalities, or even vestiges of the lives they once had. A proud knight who resents being enslaved, a master or a monster who slowly learns to be loyal, or even just comedic side characters. The shadows could have turned summons into unique, genuine characters. That would not only give Jinwoo someone to interact with, they'd also add conflict, stakes, and emotional payoff to the entire premise of the Necromancer class or excuse me, the Shadow Monarch. I mean, how's he even a monarch? Like that was true in the beginning of the series, where he was giving strategic insights and shouting orders in the battle, telling people, bow down or move to the statues with the instruments. Instead, now the summons are just tools. They fight, they die, they respawn, and because they don't challenge Jinwoo in any meaningful way, his journey just feels increasingly hollow. There's no emotional cost to losing a summon, no narrative tension in commanding them, and no sense of real companionship that fans of summoner style characters usually look forward to. And that's the tragedy. The shift from solo leveling to summoner leveling could have been a fresh new angle, an actual pivot into something with depth. Instead, it just ends up being another layer of distance between Jinwoo and the human characters around him. The summons replace the potential for genuine teamwork. Without any soul of their own, they're just a cooler looking version of being alone. And when your protagonist already doesn't interact with humans, and then his army isn't allowed to be characters either, what's left? It's just a guy silently posing with CGI skeletons. When you step back and take a look at solo leveling as a whole, the most frustrating part isn't that it drops the ball on the setting or the sidelines or its characters or that it fumbles Jinwoo's arc. It's that all of the pieces were there for something great and the anime just didn't care to use them. Like, think about it. A modern world, real world setting, with mixed with dungeon gates, they could have opened up stories with how the government has to adapt, how societies change, the economies get reshaped by magic suddenly bleeding into reality. But outside of a few throwaway lines, none of that really matters. Guilds exist, but they don't create any meaningful rivalry or politics that we ever see. Hunters have ranks, but those ranks don't lead to the kind of layered conflict you'd expect. The world feels like a cardboard cutout propped up behind Jinwoo's endless grind. Then you've got the cast. All of the characters who could easily have carried compelling character arcs all on their own. They could have been allies, foils, or even rivals who forced Jinwoo to grow in ways beyond get strong. Instead, they brushed aside to make room for Jinwoo's increasingly one-note solo adventures. And when the show finally tries to replace human dynamics with shadow summons, it ends up stripping the story of any lingering humanity it once had. The result is a series that is flashy on the surface, but it's totally hollow at its core. Yes, the fights are animated with incredible energy. Yes, Jinwoo's transformations look cool. Yes, the soundtrack slaps. But the spectacle without substance can only carry you so far. And for an adaptation of one of the most hyped manhwa in recent memory, Soul Leveling in the anime just doesn't feel like it's trying to tell a story. It feels like it's trying to sell you the idea of one. And that's the big picture failure. Solo Leveling mistakes power scaling and cool factor for storytelling. It thinks raising numbers is the same as raising stakes. And that's why once you've gotten past the hype, the whole thing just kind of feels empty. All right, so I know I've talked a lot of trash, but Solo Leveling isn't the worst anime ever, but it's a frustrating kind of story. The kind that has all the ingredients to be great, but just dropped them on the floor. If Solo Leveling had leaned into its world building, invested in its side characters, or even just given Jinwoo back some of his humanity, it could have been something special. Instead, we're just left asking the question, what if Solo Leveling was good? But we didn't get that. What we got was a protagonist who started interesting and ended hollow, a supporting cast brimming with potential, all pushed off stage, a gimmick solo leveling that was just unsustainable, and a pivot to shadow summons that only widened the gap between Jinwoo and anything resembling emotional depth. And that's why solo leveling stings so much. Not because it was terrible, but because it was almost good. All the ingredients were there, but the anime chose the shallowest possible version of its story, and in the end, it proves the title right in the worst way possible. Solo Leveling went it alone and left everything else, the setting, the characters, the humanity, all behind. Okay, well, thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think Solo Leveling wasted its potential, or do you just enjoy it for what it is? I'd appreciate it if you drop a comment below. I'll be reading through them. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into various anime. Thanks again for watching.